Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Hello students, how are you? I hope everyone is doing well. So this is the second episode in the module of Introduction to Linguistics, and today I'm going to cover a course on syntax. So we are going to know in this course, we're going to define what is syntax, how does it differ, or is it similar to grammar, and also we are going to have a look at syntactic analysis and its evolution, some of the reasons why do we need to do syntactic analysis, and then we are going to have a look at deep and surface structure, structural ambiguity, and what do we mean by this. So I would like to say that this is an introductory course into this module, into syntax. As you know, we are covering so many different parts in Introduction to Linguistics. So what we want you to understand is really to have an introduction and initiation to syntax and the main terminology that we are using in this part. So, but even though it's introductory and initiation, I'm going to provide a few examples of phrase structure rules, and we are going to draw some trees and have some exercises where we are going to practice this. So please, if you have any questions, if things are not clear by the end of this course, leave me a comment in the university's YouTube account or contact me directly via the Facebook group that we have. So let's start. Now, we are going to start with the definition of syntax and what it means. So if we go back to the etymology of the word syntax, in Greek it means arranging or putting things together. Now, this is clear, and it's clear that that syntax and the way it is defined, it is said that it studies the rules governing sentence formulation, which means how sentences are arranged, the specific order through which the specific order they follow. Whereas grammar, if you look at grammar, it is said that it's a much more general aspect. It refers to the set of rules in a given language, including syntax and morphology. Now, this means that that grammar is a general term that covers not only how sentences are formulated, but also word formation, for example, in morphology. So grammar is much more dealing with the general rules, not only the rules that govern the way sentences are formulated, which is the concern of syntax, if you can say. Evolution of syntactic analysis. Now here, we need to speak about the concept of syntactic analysis. What do we mean by syntactic analysis? So syntactic analysis refers to the process of analyzing a string of words forming a sentence. Now, when you study a specific sentence and you try to look at the different words that it constitutes, and also at the strings of words. And here, what do we mean by a string of words? It means the combination of words that we use together. And we are going to see this concept in the word, or in the concept of constituents. Now, syntactic analysis allows us to have an understanding on how sentences are formulated, what kind of rules govern them, and also what kind of typical order do they follow. So it's about the order, it's about It's about arrangements. Now, when we look at syntactic analysis, historically it has developed through time. So I'm not going to go into detail into this literature, but what has been said until now is that there has been until now two different approaches or two different ways to analyze sentences, to study sentence formulation. Now, the first approach was doing this kind of analysis in a very linear way. I mean, linear, it's clear that it's by the use of brackets and so on. But later on, another approach developed where the analysis or syntactic analysis started to be done by using diagram trees. And this is what we call, it means that it describes the underlying rule system by showing the hierarchy within a sentence. And when I say the hierarchy within a sentence, and we are going to have a look at it in few minutes now, the hierarchy of the sentence, it shows how a sentence, or what are the constituents of a specific sentence, what does it constitute of, in terms of words, in terms of phrases, in terms of verb phrases, noun phrases, what we call in general strings of words. Now let's move on to the reasons for syntactic analysis. Why do we need to do this? I mean, this is the first question we need to ask ourselves. Why do we need to do syntactic analysis? What does it serve? I mean, when you do this. Now, syntax allows us to, as we said, it allows us to know the grammar rules that keeps a string of words meaningful. Now, here it means that it's because of syntax, it's because of respect of syntactic rules that we can, as human beings, understand different messages. So this capacity to interpret the message is closely related to grammar, but specifically to syntax, which means how you order the words. And when I say the words, I'm speaking about parts of speech, and I will come to it later. It means what kind of order do you opt for when you formulate a sentence? It's a very essential thing. Without keeping or without respecting syntactic rules, you cannot deliver a meaningful message. So syntax is very helpful for human beings to make meaning. So without it, we cannot make meaning. Another aspect is that all these rules that make, or syntactic rules, or grammar rules that we make use of in order to make our messages meaningful, they are very finite. And when I say finite, it means they are very limited. We have a very few grammar or structural syntactic rules. But out of these finite number of rules, we can make infinite number of expressions. And if you remember, we have studied that as one of the properties of human language. Human language has this capacity to be productive, to be creative. Now, creativity comes from the fact that we can make use of a finite number of rules in order to produce an infinite number of expressions. And we will come to this aspect when we are going to study the difference between surface and deep structure. Now, syntactic analysis allows us to produce a potentially infinite, unlimited number of well-formed structures. And then and then also to understand that superficially different sentences can be closely related and superficially similar sentences can be different. And here I'm going to provide an example which will show that sometimes we tend to say something in the same way using the same structure, but even though we might have different meanings out of it. But at the same time, sometimes we tend to say, to use a specific structure, but the deep meaning is the same. So, and this is what we are going to have a look at. Generally, this is known as the deep and surface structure. If you have a look, for example, at the two examples on the top here, we have Charlie broke the window. And the second sentence is the window was broken by Charlie. Now, these sentences are different in their surface structure. So the way, the words here, or both sentences are different in terms of their surface structure. The surface structure here, we have Charlie, we have broke, we have the window. And then we have reversed the order by bringing the window into the beginning, okay, and having a Charlie at the end of the sentence. So this is a reversal of the order of the first sentence. Now, which means that we have different surface structures, but how about the deep structure? Do we make the same meaning? Do we interpret these two sentences in the same way? Or do we interpret them in different ways? So if we interpret them in the same way, in terms of their deep structure, it means that we have, if we have the same meaning, then this is what we call the deep structure. So in order to distinguish between what do we mean then by deep structure and surface structure, the deep structure is the underlying syntactic structure of a sentence. It is the underlying syntactic structure of a sentence. Sentences generated by phrase structure rules. But in terms of the surface structure, it is the outward form of a sentence. It is derived from deep structures by a series of transformations. So which means that the meaning that we make out of these two sentences is the same, but the way we are going to realize this meaning can be done in different ways. Now, in different ways, this is what we call the surface structure of the sentence. So this means a single underlying abstract representation, finite rules, can become different surface structures, which means we can have infinite expressions out of different surface structures. Another thing we need to have a look at is what we call structural ambiguity. Sometimes with some sentences we tend to have different meanings. We can derive different meanings because the sentences they have or they imply different meanings. Now let's have a look at the example there. Structural ambiguity is defined or refers to when two or more possible meanings within a single sentence or sequence of words. Example, the sentence below might be interpreted in two ways. For example, here, the surface structure of the sentence is small boys and girls. Now, this small boys and girls, we have here coordination between boys and girls, and we have small as an adjective. Now, with this coordination, we either tend to have an understanding that it means small boys and small girls, since we have coordination, or we might say small boys and all girls. So which means that there is a kind of structural ambiguity in the sentence there, which means that the surface structure states this, but in terms of the deep structure and what we are going to understand from this and to how we are going to interpret it might be interpreted in two different ways or even many different ways. Now let's move on to the common symbols and abbreviations that are used in syntactic analysis. Now we have adj, where it refers to adjective, preposition to preposition, prep, article to art. So I would like you here to go through this list and study the list very well, because we are going to make use of all these symbols and abbreviations. For example, here you have the brackets. They are optional constituents, and the other brackets here, the curved brackets, they only one constituent must be selected. But here, when you do this, it means one of the items will be an optional constituent. Also, you can have here the star. The star, it means ungrammatical sentence. And also you have here the arrow. The arrow, it means consists of something. What else? So we have also PPP, VP, NP, S stands for sentence. Okay. So these are the most common symbols and abbreviations, and we will make use of them during this course. Now, for constituents and constituency test, what do we mean by constituents? Sentences are formed of constituents that function as single units, a single unit within a hierarchical structure. A constituent can be a morpheme, a word, or a string of words, a phrase, or a clause. Okay, now let's have a look at these examples here. These are examples of constituents. Now, constituents, as we have seen here in the definition, might be a word and might be also a string of words, which means that if we look at the first sentence, this young lady is a friend. We can say that this young lady is a noun phrase, and the whole noun phrase here constitute one unit. It stands for a single unit. Now, what do we mean that it stands with like a single unit? It means that we cannot, for example, say this and stop, or say this young and stop, but we can say this lady or this young lady. And we are going to come to a specific way where we can test how do we know a string of words constitute a constituent. Now, also, if you have a look at is, a friend, is a constituent, and a friend is another constituent, which means that constituents can go from the smallest items into strings of words, into phrases and clauses. Here I've provided an example of a noun phrase constituent, then a verb phrase constituent. For example, they will be leaving tomorrow. So will be leaving is a verb phrase. Adjective phrase, for example, in he bought a beautiful car. Beautiful car is another constituent. So it constitutes a string of words which constitute an adjective and a noun or an NP. Then preposition phrase. Preposition phrase, as in the example, the ball is on the table. So on the table is a preposition phrase, and it is a constituent. Now, in the next slide, we are going to have a look at how do we know that a string of words formulates a constituent or a string of words? Now we can know this through what we call constituency tests, and I'm going to provide examples of 4 different tests. There is what we call substitution tests, movement tests, question and answer tests, and the last one is coordination tests. Let's start with substitution tests. What do we mean by substitution tests? Now, we can know that a string of words constitutes a unit if we replace this unit with a word and see if the sentence stays grammatical. Now, let's have an example. We have here, the old man works at the factory. The old man works at the factory. We consider that the old man formulates or is considered as the NP constituent. Another constituent is the VP, which stands for works. And the third constituent is the PP, the prepositional phrase, which is at the factory. Now, with substitution test, let's consider that we are going to replace the old man with he. And then see if the sentence stays correct. Now, we say he works at the factory. That's correct, which means that the old man, all these 3 words there, they formulate one unit, which means they are replaceable by only a pronoun here. Let's have another try with other constituents at the end. For example, we can leave the old man in the second example. The old man works there. Now, there replaces or is a substitute of at the factory. Now, from this substitution, we understand what the sentence means, and it's correct. Let's move on to the third substitution test. How about saying the old man does so? Now, does so, here we are trying to substitute the VP. Now, the VP, in the VP we have the verb phrase. The verb phrase where it includes both the verb but also the PPP. Okay? The old man does so, which means that in the VP, it includes the VP and the PPP. So that's why even if we have deleted both with the replacement, with the substitution does so, the sentence stays correct and grammatical. Now, how about the fourth substitution test? The fourth example. We say, it works at the factory. Now here we have provided another pronoun. We have replaced the old man with another pronoun, which is it. Now, what do you think about this sentence? Now, the first substitution is semantically not correct, which means we cannot say it works, because normally we use it for objects, not for human beings who have the capacity to work. Now, which means that syntax, also the grammaticality of syntax, doesn't come only from structure rules or phrase structure rules, but it comes also from lexical rules, okay? Rules of semantics, rules of meaning. So that's why we consider that the fourth example or the fourth substitution test is not possible. Movement test. Replace a string of words or unit into the beginning of the sentence. Now, this is another type of test which will show us if the sentence stays grammatical or not. Now, look at these fragments here, or at these constituents. We have the first constituent, which is the NP, the old man, the second VP, works, and the third is PP, prepositional phrase, at the factory. Now, if we change the order of the sentence by putting at the factory at the beginning, and then see what we will have. At the factory, the old man works. So we think that this is possible. So it's acceptable. It's meaningful. We understand what is being said. How about the second movement tests? When we move or dissociate at from the noun phrase. Okay, so we have the factory, the old man works at. So which means that, once we dissociate the preposition from the noun phrase, the sentence just loses its grammaticality. It's no longer clear and meaningful. So this is an ungrammatical sentence. So which means that it's impossible to dissociate an article from an NP. And also it means that at the factory is all this sentence or all this phrase is considered as a constituent. This is only a string of words that constitute one constituent. Another way to check, whether constituents are units or not, single units or not, we can ask questions and substitute them with a WH word. Okay, let's have the same example. The old man works at the factory. We can ask a question about at the factory, about the PPP. Now, if we do this, we say, the old man works where? So it's acceptable. Okay, who works at the factory? If we ask a question about the old man. Now, what about if we ask a question about both the NP and the prepositional phrase? We can say, who works what? Who works what? Or who works where? Okay? Coordination tests are also other ways that will allow us to see if a string of words acts like a single constituent. Coordinates coordination or a string of words coordinates a string of words with a parallel structure to it. For example, if you have a PPP, you can double, or you can use another similar structure to it. If you have a VP, you use coordination, and then you use the same structure. Like the example we have there, the old man works at the factory. Now, if we add and, we said at the factory, I need a similar parallel structure, and at the garden. Now, which means that we can have different, we can repeat that over and over again, and we are going to see it later as another property of syntax, which allows us to repeat, what we call recursion. Also, we can repeat starting from the VP point. The old man works at the factory, and studies at school. So sorry, there is a mistake there. And studies at school. So here also, or this also shows us that works at the factory acts as one constituent under the category of VP. Okay, all this phrase is called a VP, a verb phrase, because we have considered the test of coordination, so we can repeat the same parallel structure. Now, how do we do syntactic analysis? What kind of procedure we follow? So usually, before you do a syntactic analysis, and we are going to have a practice on how we can draw trees, you need to do what we call segmentation. You need to do segmentation, which means to identify the constituents. You need to identify what is an article, what is a verb, what is an article from a verb from a noun, and the noun from a preposition, and so on. You need to to identify the different segments of the sentence. Not only the different segments of sentence, but also the different strings of words in the sentence. This is the most important part. And then classify. You classify, determine the syntactic categories of the constituents, okay? If I have a constituent, I need to know, is it a noun phrase or a prepositional phrase, a verb phrase, or a complement phrase, okay? So there are different types of phrases, and you need to know what kind of phrases different strings of words make, okay? Also, you need to identify again, identify or determine the grammatical function of the constituents. Each constituent, you need to know what does it stand for. As I said, is it an article, a determiner, a pronoun, a preposition, a complementizer? What is it? What is it exactly? And then you start drawing the tree. After that, you start drawing the tree, draw this syntactic structure. Let's have a look at this example. This is a tree, a hierarchical tree. So tree diagrams can be defined as visual representations that capture the underlying structure of phrases and sentences in a hierarchical way, okay? So in this way, we can know which elements constitute which elements, okay? We know that about the hierarchy of sentences. For example, we have here all this, the girl saw a dog. All these constituents are included under the heading of the sentence here, okay? It is the sentence, it stands for sentence. Now the sentence is separated into two main constituents. The first main constituent is what we call the noun phrase, and the second main constituent is the verb phrase. The noun phrase is divided into, according to this sentence, into an article and also into a noun, okay, which stands for girl. Now for the VP, in the VP, it includes a verb, which is saw, and a noun phrase, okay? And then a noun phrase can be, again, consists of an article and a noun. So you see, we go from the larger constituents into the medium constituents, okay, like phrases and so on, into the word parts of speech constituents, or different words that we use. Now, what about phrase structure rules? Now here we are going to have a look at what do we mean by phrase structure rules, and what are the main processes or the main rules that we have, especially in English. So this is mainly a focus on English language. We can think of the tree diagram format in two different ways. There is what we call static representation of the structure of the sentence. A static representation, it's when you go linear, okay? This is what we call the linear representation of syntax. I mean, you don't go vertically, but you go horizontally, and you describe what do you have in a specific sentence. And also, there is another way to do syntactic analysis. It's through dynamic format. It represents a way of generating a very large number of other sentences with similar structures. For example, an NP consists of an article and a noun. Okay, this is another way to represent visually syntactic structures. Now, what do we mean by phrase structure rules? Phrase structure rules state that the structure of a phrase of a specific type will consist of one or more constituents in a particular order. And we're going to have more details on this. But not now. I'll do this in the second episode of this part of syntax, inshallah. So until now, أستودعكم الله الذي لا تضيع ودائعه. I would like to say at the end, I'll be happy to receive your comments, your questions. If you didn't understand some of the aspects we have discussed in this first episode, please send me your questions and comments via the Facebook group. So stay safe, stay blessed. Allah yankum.